This right here is a Miu Mini Plus, a tiny little gaming device that is designed to play old games. It runs really well. It has fantastic capabilities. If you want to run a custom firmware on it, it runs great. It's called Onion OS. You can change the way it looks and feels. You can do a whole ton of stuff with this little device. You can listen to music. It could work as an MP3 player if you wanted to. It has an actual, one of those headphone jacks so that you can actually plug it in. You can load it up with a bunch of games. It has a video player so that if you wanted to watch a movie on this thing, you can, or a TV series or whatever you want to watch, you can watch on this thing. It connects to the internet so you can officially scrape whenever you want. You can just scrape a bunch of games on here so that you can have all the box art. You can quite literally do almost anything with this tiny device. But today, the video has nothing to do with this specific device. It actually has to do more with the functionality that it was designed to do, which is to play games. And to be more specific, it was designed to play lots of old games through emulation. So if you're new to the whole emulation scene, or you don't know what exactly emulation is, well, simply put, emulation allows you to play your older games or games of other systems on your PC or Mac or whatever desktop environment that you use. You're allowed to sort of play games through the process of emulation. It emulates your old consoles in a way. And basically, it allows you to play from anything like PlayStation to GameCube to some older consoles like the NES, SNES, maybe a Sega Genesis, or even, more on the handheld side of things, maybe a Game Gear, or, a Game Boy or Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance. I mean, it goes on and on and on, but the main gist is that it is literally a way of you to actually have access to your old games through a process called emulation, which basically allows you to play through these desktop environments. And what is going on as of recently is that right now emulation is kind of on, some broken ice, some shaky ground, let's say. And that actually kind of has Nintendo involved. So recently, if you are not, a gamer, or you're not someone who is aware, there is an emulator that was very popular on, app stores. It was open source, and a lot of people were very excited that this was a thing, and this emulator allowed you to emulate Nintendo Switch games, which, believe it or not, is kind of a shock if you stop to think about it, because the Nintendo Switch has been around now since, I believe, 2017, and even though it's been, let's be honest, not that long, the fact that there's already an emulation system, set up on desktop is a surprise to a lot of people. But yeah, you could totally emulate your own Nintendo Switch games whenever you want. And that's a great thing, because if you don't want to use Nintendo systems to enjoy their games, you have the other option of being able to actually use, another system to actually play those games. But unfortunately, Nintendo isn't very flexible. Let's just be a little bit more, open-minded, but yeah, they're definitely not flexible when it comes to emulation. And to prove that, they actually decided to sue these guys for, I believe, like $3 million. And they ended up, taking the bargain and actually accepting it. But ultimately, we have to look at this entire situation with a grain of salt, and as, we are understanding it, the whole reason behind why, Nintendo was going after these guys is that, A, they were trying to make a profit off of their emulation. They had a Patreon set up, and they were making money out of it, and I think Nintendo really didn't like that idea, so they said, like, you know what, we're going to sue them because ultimately, that's not really what we want. We don't want people to be, profiting off of our source code. So ultimately, they ended up suing these guys. But I think they also mentioned that they don't want people to pirate their games, which kind of, I get it, specifically when it comes to the Switch. But when it comes to older consoles, I don't think that they can make a good case against emulation for older consoles, and I'm going to tell you why. I think the very first thing that I should bring up is that you really don't have accessibility to these older consoles like you did maybe 15, 20 years ago, and I'm going to give you a good example of that. Today, you could probably get in your car, go to your nearest Walmart, Target, or any store that sells consoles, or even just go online and buy a console directly from the manufacturer, or the brand that you want, and they'll be able to deliver it to you, or you can buy it in store, and that's accessible. You have that accessibility to those consoles because they are still producing those consoles. Unfortunately, I can't get in my car and go to the nearest Walmart or Target or go to the manufacturer's website and say, hey, can I buy a GameCube? They're going to look at you and laugh because they don't have that, and they stopped manufacturing those consoles years ago. So it is kind of iffy that we are, in an age where accessibility is a big deal, specifically when it comes to emulation. And emulation allows you to have that accessibility without having to worry about, having to go out of your way and pay an exuberant amount of money sometimes for a console that honestly is old and may not last as long as if you were, using an emulation system, which will allow you to have access to these games essentially forever without any major consequences when it comes to the system that you're using. And another thing that I'd also like to add on to this is that emulation has allowed people to have access to older consoles and older games that in any other way they would not have access to. So essentially, you can go on the internet, search up a ROM of your favorite game or whatever game that you've never played. You can download that ROM and play it through an emulator. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, Marcelo, you're stealing. Oh, you're promoting the stealing of games. Well, I don't think that necessarily if you buy a product and you want to share it with somebody, it's not really like, a bad thing. Like if I buy a DVD, I can go to a friend's house and loan him that DVD and he can play that DVD on his thing. It's not a crime to share something like that with somebody. Now, I understand that, when it comes down to software in specific, I get it. You don't want people sharing these things online, but, again, goes back to the accessibility. I can't go into a Walmart and buy a GameCube game. I just can't do that. And even if I could go into that Walmart, there would be no way that they would be making a significant profit out of an old piece of software. I mean, you can't put a price tag on an old game, being that Nintendo makes no money from those games at all. Like, you can literally go and buy a GameCube game, and I'm using GameCube as an example because it's a much more advanced and much closer to reality console due to the fact that even the Wii can play GameCube games. But I can't just go to Walmart and buy a GameCube game. I mean, I come from the point in time where you would go to a Walmart and you could play the demos on the actual console, and you just look upwards and just have those controllers in your hands, and then at the end of, maybe the better part of an hour, you'd leave that Walmart or Target with like a pain in your neck. Like, I'm from that point in time. So I do remember when they used to sell GameCube games on, display. I remember playing, these games when I went to go to, go to Walmart or whatever. But I can't do that anymore. And they don't have those games accessible. So if they don't have the games and they've already given up on that hardware, there's no reason for them to fight against things like Dolphin Emulator or Cemu or any of these other, Nintendo-based, software type emulation, because they're not going to make any more money. So, I mean, there's no reason to fight against it. But in the specific case of the Nintendo Switch, being that it is a console that, till this day, is, being sold, they're going to fight against it no matter what. But I do think that I have a story to tell when it comes down to the Nintendo Switch that will surprise you, specifically when it comes to how I came about wanting to buy a Switch. So if you go back a few years ago on my personal channel, my personal vlogging channel, for those of you who don't know, I have a vlogging channel, but if you go back a few years ago when the Switch actually came out, I put out a video saying why I will not buy a Switch. And that video kind of highlights as to why I didn't want a Switch. At the time that it came out, there wasn't a lot of games. It wasn't really fleshed out. I mean, the concept was quite interesting to me, but all in all, it wasn't really something that I was like super excited and really enthralled by and really wanted to get, because it was kind of like a new concept I was still trying to like get off the ground. So I put out that video, and if you guys want to go watch it, you guys can feel free to go watch it. But I think in that video, I cover everything that I meant to say there, that why I wouldn't want to get a Switch, period. Then a year later, I made another video saying why I might get a Switch, and then kind of highlight the reason as to why I might get a Switch, and why the reasons why, what games I would like to see on the Switch itself, which is great. Though a lot of the games that I mentioned on that specific video have already been ported to the Nintendo Switch, which is mind-blowing, maybe with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 titles, but I say like 5 or 6 titles in there, and like 4 of those titles at least have already been ported to the Switch, which is mind-blowing. So a lot of time passed, and then like around 2019, I said, you know what? I'm actually excited to get a Switch. I'd really like to experience what having a Nintendo Switch is like. So I started buying like 1 or 2 accessories. I bought like a grip for the Nintendo Switch, and I bought like a battery, and I was like, you know what? I'm ready. I really want to buy a Switch. And I ended up never getting to the point where I had enough money to actually buy the Switch, but I had these accessories with me. And it was kind of like, okay, maybe one day I'll get to own a Switch, but the opportunity just never came out to be. So then a lot of time passed, the pandemic passed, and then like about a year and a half ago, I turned to myself and I said, you know what? I want to experience at least one game that everybody talks about when they talk about the Nintendo Switch, and that is Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is one of those games that you're like, holy cow, this is amazing. Everybody says it's amazing, so it must be amazing, right? So I said, you know what? I want to experience it on PC because everybody says it's really good. So what I did was I went online, I found a ROM of Breath of the Wild that I could play on PC, specifically for the Wii U emulator, Cemu. And I said, you know what? I'm going to play this game, and let's see if it's actually all that good. And I started playing Breath of the Wild, and believe it or not, I absolutely fell in love with this game. I started playing it. I think I put a good amount of hours into this game. I did a bunch of, of the quests, did the main quests, fought a few boss battles, and I said, you know what? I don't want to end this game. I don't want to stop playing this game, but I feel like I have to, because I want to be able to play this game when I am out and about. I want to take this game with me everywhere I go. I want to be able to pop it into my Nintendo Switch or wherever I may be and just play this game, because it's such a great game. I just want to take it everywhere I go. So I said, you know what? After a few hours, several hours of playing it on PC, I said, you know what? I'm going to put the controller down, and I think I'm going to invest in a Nintendo Switch. And that is what essentially happened. I went out and I actually got myself a Switch. And now, after years of saying that, I may have not wanted a Switch, I officially own a Nintendo Switch. And it's not just any Nintendo Switch, it's the Nintendo Switch OLED. And I do own a real copy of Breath of the Wild. And I still think it is a spectacular game that if you ever get a chance to see and experience for yourselves, you will be surprised how good this game is. And I absolutely love it. I'll literally sit and just play this game for 2-3 hours, just exploring, walking around, seeing the incredible, wildlife and everything that this game has to offer. And to me, that value, the value of being able to play this game on the actual console, is incredible. It is, without a doubt, an incredible experience. But at the same time, a lot of people don't have that privilege. A lot of people do not have access to these older consoles, these older pieces of software, and ultimately, it's very important that brands like Nintendo understand that although your intention to stop these, emulators from popping up, all you're doing is incentivizing more people to do the same. And even though Nintendo's approach to cutting off, these guys that do Yuzu and that did, this incredible emulator for Switch, was somewhat justified, being that they were making money off of the software, off of their, source code. And just know that just because these guys got, the siphon at the end of it, they got, cut off, it doesn't mean that Switch emulation is completely over and never happening again. Because, just so you know, there will always be more emulators to come that won't be making a profit, but will have the capability of be able to play on PC. And I'll also add one more tiny story to this whole entire emulation experience. And that comes down to one console in specific, and that is the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 was the console that I grew up with. It was literally the one thing that I got super excited about, because to me, it was an experience unlike any other. I would go to Walmart, I'd go to Target or wherever, and I'd just play the PS2. And to me, that was an incredible experience. And I loved playing the PS2 and playing all these games that I, grew up with, whether it be, Pitfall, The Lost Expedition, which later went to the Wii, games that really touched my heart, like Indiana Jones and The Emperor's Tomb, Need for Speed. I mean, there's a huge list of games that I loved. James Bond's Nightfire, which is something that I absolutely loved playing, specifically with my dad. But it's such a sad thing when you have that console and the console stops working, and inevitably you have to, find a way to play the games that you have. So what I ended up doing was transferring all the discs that I have onto my PC so that I can play these games on my PC. Now, I know what you're saying, Marcella. Nintendo is fighting against piracy. What you're doing is completely legal because these are your games. You own them. You bought them with your own money. There's nothing wrong with that. I understand. But if Nintendo is willing to hurt a huge group of people who use this software, which is Yuzu, I mean, what's stopping PlayStation from inevitably saying, you know what? We're going to cause a problem now for the people who play PS2 games on their PC. Or what's stopping Microsoft from doing the same thing? They could say, oh, Xenia now? We're not letting you guys play Xenia. But I think the morality, of the whole situation is that these companies want to make money. That's all it is. The point of this entire story is that these companies want to make money whichever way possible. And if emulation is getting in the way, they're going to end up going after people who are kind of putting a dent in their profits. Do I understand where they're coming from? Sure. But at the end of the day, it's really how you handle the situation. And if Nintendo would have been willing to say, you know what, you give us the profits, but you can keep the emulator online, I think that would have been fine. But ultimately, they want to make sure that they're making profits, and pirating the games is kind of what they're going after. And they say that kind of put a dent in the sales of the actual game that they were trying to fight against, which is Tears of the Kingdom, which kind of is a full circle moment because the real reason why I invested in Nintendo in the first place and bought a Switch was because I actually played the game on my computer. So I think that this is a much deeper discussion that we need to have when it comes to emulation, playing these games on PC or even on small devices like the Miyoo Mini Plus, and finding some common ground here, because I believe emulation is a very important thing that should be kept and should be, fortified, because ultimately those hardwares like the GameCube, the Wii, the PS2, all these older consoles that came way before their time, ultimately that hardware is going to break down. Ultimately that hardware isn't going to work anymore, and it's not going to have the same effect. And all we're going to have to turn to are emulators. And these companies could very well put a dent in that process, but as a gamer, as someone who enjoys playing games and having these experiences, I think emulators should be protected and should be very much an important part of the discussion when it comes to gaming. And I want that discussion to continue. So much so that I want you guys to go down in the comments below and tell me what you guys think about emulators. Do you think emulators are a good thing? Do you think they're a bad thing? Do you expect emulators to change anytime soon? Or do you think that is it going to still be the same thing where people continue to pirate games off the internet and not really invest in those consoles? But I don't know. I need to hear from you. I want to know specifically from what you guys think down in the comments below, and let's have this discussion because it is a very important one to me, and I believe it should be a very important one to you as well. And I really do want to thank you guys for coming out and actually watching this video because it is a very important topic indeed. And if you're down there, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified when new videos go live on this channel. Now, talking about things in the past, specifically when it comes to gaming, what if there was a way that we could talk about something in the past that recently made an appearance on a very specific little tech demo that, after watching, I am utterly blown away. And I will have to admit, it has something to do with Marvel. So yes, Marvel, tech demo, I think you know where I'm going with this, and that is going to be next week's topic on this channel.